Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is a woman chess grandmaster, Atousa, and today I want to show you some opening traps. So I'm going to show you Caro-Kann Defense. As you may know, Caro-Kann Defense is one of the most popular openings in chess, and basically it happens after e4 c6. This defense was played by two players, an English player called Caro and an Austrian player called Kann. That's why they call it Caro-Kann, and they were analyzing this opening in 1885. So around that time they were analyzing the game of this opening, and they actually played some games successfully. So that's why this opening got its name. And today I'm going to show you some traps that you can use against Caro-Kann Defense. So when you're playing as white, I want to show you how you can win the game. I'm going to show you some opening traps and some tricks that you can win your game very quickly. So let's dive into it. Okay, so first move, you play e4, my favorite move. All of you guys probably know by now. And then if black plays c6, here the most popular move is d4. But you guys can confuse your opponent and play knight c3. Knight c3 is not a bad move at all. Why? Because we are still in the opening, right? You know that in chess we have three phases: opening, middle game, and end game. By moving your knight to c3, you're developing your piece towards the center, which is actually a good improvement in your position, right? And black usually pushes the pawn to d5, and here you can play knight f3. Okay, instead of knight f3, you can also play queen f3. I'm going to show you a couple of tricks in this line, queen f3. Now, black has some options. Let's say black takes the pawn on e4, then you can take with your knight, and if here black plays e5, you can play bishop c4. So your idea is to take the pawn on f7 and checkmate the king, because let's say if black makes a mistake and let's say move the bishop to d6, white can simply checkmate the king in just one move, right? So black needs to defend the pawn or block the queen. So let's say black goes knight f6. This is not a good move because now you can play knight g5, and now you're threatening knight takes f7 or bishop takes f7. So it's not easy to protect this pawn. And even if black goes bishop g4, you have another great move here, queen b3. So what's the plan behind this move, queen b3? You're not only attacking the pawn on b7, but also you're threatening the pawn on f7. So you keep those threats, but also you add another threat, which is taking the pawn on b7 and trying to get the rook on a8. Okay, but let's go back, because after moving the queen to f3, black might push the pawn to d4, right? Black might say, okay, I'm going to attack the knight, and this knight has to move. So we can move the bishop to c4. We have the same idea. We want to take the pawn on f7. Let's say if he takes, we can simply take queen takes f7, and after king d7, we don't need to check the king on e6, because this king can simply escape and then our queen will be in danger. So instead, we can take the pawn on c3, and it's okay to be down in material, but the point is, what is this king doing on d7? You know what I mean? So my plan is to play bishop f4, long castle, and checkmate. Isn't that a beautiful checkmate? You castle and then you checkmate your opponent at the same time. So imagine, I'm just gonna play some random moves just to show you guys how you can checkmate. So let's say black goes here, you move your bishop here, black goes here, and then you can long castle and checkmate the king. Isn't that beautiful? I really love that. So it's really rare that you can castle and checkmate your opponent, right? Okay, but anyway, so let's go back. That's why after bishop c4, black cannot take on c3. Black needs to avoid queen takes f7. And let's say black goes knight f6. After that, you can play e5, attacking the knight. Pawn takes knight, because if the knight moves, obviously we can just simply take the knight and attack, the pawn at f7. And also we are threatening the pawn at b7 as well. And here white is much better. So let's say instead of playing knight d5, black takes the knight on c3. Now we can take on f6. If black takes here on f6, we have different ways to continue. We can take the pawn on c3, or even we can check on e2. But let's say black doesn't take the pawn. Let's say black pushes the pawn to g6, which is not a great move, but since I want to show you a very nice tactical move here, so let's say black goes g6, and now you can take the pawn on c3, and if black goes knight d7 here, the point is to take the pawn on f6 with the knight, because black doesn't want to get double pawns, right? Okay, so after knight d7, white has a great move here. I want you guys to pause the video and think about the best move for white. What can white do in order to win immediately? So the best move here for white is to take the pawn on f7. Black has to take, right? And now we can take the pawn on e7, and this is a discovery check or discover check. Look, the queen is checking the king, the pawn is attacking the queen. So probably the best idea here is to take on e7, right? Because if the king moves to g7, we can simply promote our pawn to a queen and win the game. So if the king goes to e7, now we have a nice skewer here by moving our bishop to g5. This is not only a check, but also we're gonna win the queen. And if the knight blocks, we can take with the queen, and the next move is to take the queen, and this is just winning for white. Okay, so this is another trap that you can try in Caro-Kann Defense, but let's go back, because after the second move d5, I showed you some lines in queen f3, right? Now let's try knight f3, which is more logical, because in the opening you usually don't want to move your queen too early into the game. Your queen can get attacked by the other pieces. So you try to develop your minor pieces, which are your knights and the bishops. That's the best strategy, especially for beginners and intermediate players. Okay, so you play knight f3, and now black can play bishop g4, or black can take the pawn. If black goes bishop g4, you can play h3, bishop h5, bishop e2. You want to unpin your knight. And if the knight goes to a6, which is not a good move, because we usually want to move our pieces towards the center, right? But now you can take the pawn on d5. This is an important move. What's the plan behind this move? The plan is to open up a diagonal against the king. It means if the pawn takes, we can simply move our bishop to b5, the king is in check, and black has to move the queen to d7, and black is gonna lose the queen. And actually here we have another tactical move. After king takes d7, we can check with the knight on e5. The knight is checking the king, but also the queen is attacking the bishop. So after moving the king, then we can simply take another bishop as well. So white is totally winning in this position. Okay, let's go back and look at another trap in this opening. So you remember that in this position we played knight f3, right? And I showed you how to play against bishop g4. But let's say black takes the pawn on e4. Now you can take with the knight, and now if black goes knight f6, you can play queen e2, and this is actually a famous trap. Black cannot play knight b to d7 because white has one move checkmate. I want you guys to stop this video and think about the best move for white again. The best move, and of course a checkmate, is knight d6. Why? Because the pawn is pinned. The pawn is pinned to the king, right? The queen is pinning the pawn to the king, so it's not possible to take the knight on d6. But anyway, if in this position black goes bishop g4, we can play g3 because notice that the queen is blocking the bishop, so we need to fianchetto our bishop or fianchetto our bishop. And after knight b d7, we can again checkmate the king this way, which also called smothered mate. This is another typical checkmate in chess. Okay, so let's go back. So we took on e4, and let's say black doesn't play knight f6. Black moves the knight to d7. After knight d7, you can move your bishop to c4. But another move that actually I wanted to mention here is that you can also play queen e2, and if the knight goes to f6, you can still get this checkmate. So this is another trick that you can use. But let's say if black knows what to do, it's better to play bishop c4. After bishop c4, if black goes knight f6, the knight is attacking your knight. You're going to play knight g5. The idea is to take the pawn on f7 and get this fork. So black has to block the bishop. Now after e6, you can play queen e2. Your plan is to put pressure on this pawn on e6. If the knight goes to b6, you can play knight e5, which is a brilliant move. So what's the idea? Your idea is to take the pawn f7 again. You want to attack the weakest pawn in chess. The pawn on f7 is the weakest pawn. I mean, at the beginning of the game, it's the weakest pawn, and the reason is because it's just protected by the king. So the pawn on f7 for black and the pawn on f2 for white are more vulnerable than the other pawns. Anyway, so in this position, let's say black goes queen d4. Now you have a lot of moves here. You can even move your bishop back, but you can simply take the pawn on f7 and you're attacking the rook. If the rook moves to g8, you can take the pawn on e6 and you have a winning position. Why? Because let's say if bishop takes e6, you take with the queen, the king is trapped. So the only move here is to play bishop e7, and now you can simply castle. And notice that black can't castle because our queen is covering here, our knight is covering here. And let's say black wants to exchange the queens, but we don't want to exchange the queens, so we just move our queen to b3, and white is up by 2 points, and this is absolutely winning for white. But if you want to exchange the queens here, you can play knight e5, and after queen e6, knight takes e6, and again white is better in this position. Why? Because white is up 2 points, and also we have great knights in black's position. So I hope that you can use these tricks and traps in your games. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you soon in the next video. Thanks for watching, and have a beautiful day or night wherever you are in this world.